As I said earlier, Dr. Harkins is no stranger to our pulpit. He has brought messages to us about finding childlike joy in our lives and rejoicing in God's plans for us. We found these sermons uplifting indeed. And as Jackie usually says to ministers when they return to our pulpit, I don't know how you're going to top your sermons, but let's see what you bring. Please give a warm welcome to the Reverend Dr. Derrick Harkins.
Thank you so much. I just hope you give me the license of trying to at least do a bit of what I've done in the past. But it's a joy to be with you at the beginning of this new year with all of the promise and prospect that it holds. It is truly a blessing to come back. You know, Madison Avenue Baptist Church, you all are somebody. I have the pleasure of knowing one of your staunch members very well in a professional capacity and personal one, the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Dudley, of course, as many of you know, with American Baptist Churches in Metropolitan New York. But I was minding my own business a few weeks ago, reading, I think it was the New York Times or whatever, and lo and behold, here you all get a shout out from Tamron Hall, and she just talks about what a wonderful congregation and fellowship and community you all are. So I'm glad to be able to be in your midst again today with all of those wonderful and well-deserved accolades that indeed have come your way. It is a joy, it's a pleasure, it's truly a blessing, and I'm thankful for the warmth in which I've been received before, and again, of course, today, Cheryl Sims, I thank you. If you'd wanted to go ahead and preach, I would have invited you to go ahead and take my place, but we'll do our very best. I want our hearts and minds to focus in on a passage that comes to us from the book of Isaiah. This is an interesting time in the year. The newness of the year, of course, the calendar. Also, the season of Epiphany, where we really come to the fullness of what the promise of the Advent and then, of course, Christmastide has come to mean. And I love the idea that now we come to the point where Epiphany, by its definition, means that the reality of Christ is in the world. Emmanuel, God with us. So now we have work to do. As the wonderful spiritual sage Howard Thurman talked about the fact that the real work of Christmas begins after all of the festivities have ended, but at the same time we are compelled to carry forth the message that God cares for us, is with us, and compels us to go forward. So with that understanding that we are in that season, we think about the promises of God's power and presence, and this passage from Isaiah, the 60th chapter, the 1st through 9th verses, I believe speaks to what that means and how we should indeed navigate it. Hear the word of the Lord. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried in their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice. Because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you, the wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all those of Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered to you. The rams of Nebaioth shall minister to you. They shall be acceptable on my altar, and I will glorify my glorious house. Who are these that fly like a cloud and like doves to their windows? For the coastlands shall wait for me, the ships of Tarshish first, to bring your children from far away, their silver and gold with them, for the name of the Lord your God and for the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you. May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and prayerfully discerning of his word. I want to spend even these few moments with you just talking about the idea of seeing in the dark. Seeing in the dark. What you heard me read was a promise of the glory of God's power and presence visited upon God's people. What an incredibly rich image it is of the full measure of light and joy, not only surrounding God's people, but meaning that therefore God's people are radiant so that they are a beacon of hope to others. That's an important thing to grasp onto, especially in the beginning of a new year when we think about the prospects and the promises and the challenges that face us, that promise is real and sure. But I want us, before we get to that portion of this passage, which is by far the overwhelming portion, I want us to think about what's being said just before then. In fact, the radiance and the fullness of light is so rich in this passage, you may not even notice what is said before that. It says to us, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples." Now, right after that, of course, it says, "But the Lord will arise upon you." But I want to tarry for just a moment around what it means to grope and try to navigate through that darkness to get to the light that is God's promise. Because I think we fool ourselves if we don't think that it is important to understand that while God gives us the blessings and the bounty of radiant and joyful light, God also gives us the spiritual fortitude to navigate through the obscurities of challenge and difficulty, to get through the night, to get to the morning. Now, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but let me just say, I don't know about you, but as the new year was turning a few days ago, like no doubt many of you, I had the wonderful incoming, and I sent them out myself, of the very best wishes for a wonderful and prosperous new year and all the joy that comes with that. But along with that, I had more than a few folks say, and I have to believe, or I should say, I have to indicate that I was a part of this chorus too, that while I trust for the promise and the prospect of this year, this is a challenging year. There's a lot at stake this year. A lot could change this year. A lot is in the balance this year. So while I say that, and while of course it represents a significant and real challenge, I want to come to an understanding of how we navigate through that challenge. Our family lived in the Washington, D.C. area for some 20-odd years, and one of our favorite places to sort of retreat and enjoy the beauty of the surrounding environment was the eastern shore of Maryland. And we pretty much every summer would make our way there, and on one occasion we decided to do something a little different. We went to Dorchester County, and we found a spot that at the time had no fancy marker or no designation to it as to its historicity. But we found it by way of descriptions in various guidebooks, and it was more or less a modest clearing in the woods. And that spot in Dorchester, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore, was the birthplace of Harriet Tubman. And while there were no interpretive kiosk there, there was nothing that the Park Service had done there, it still meant a lot to us, myself and my wife and our daughters, because it gave us the opportunity to see, to visualize the humble nature of her forthcoming into the world, but then also to think about the incredible and immeasurably significant work that she did. The Moses of the Underground Railroad, carrying hundreds of people from enslavement to freedom, doing that over the course of a number of years, and doing it under cover of darkness. That's an important point to understand. Of course, you'd say to yourself, well, it makes sense that she more or less would have to do that. But here's the thing. Under that cover of darkness, using the North Star, amongst other things, as a guidepost, if you will, Harriet Tubman was able to orchestrate and design and execute and implement a pathway from captivation to liberation. She was able to guide those who were with her through the uncertainties of the darkness to the promises, even though they might have been tempered, but nevertheless, the promises of light and emancipation. And I think about the fact that there had to have been, I'll be so bold as to presume that in her heart and mind, there had to be a couple of things that unfolded. I think she had to have a sense of determination as she moved through this process with all of those with her. I think she had to have a sense of surety of purpose. But I think she also probably had to have a respectful understanding of the difficulties of the dark. I think she probably needed to understand that while she had no doubt gained experience trip after trip after trip moving through the Underground Railroad, she probably realized that there always still had to be a dimension of reliance and dependence upon something greater than herself to navigate through that terrain. So I share that example with you to simply say that I believe in her heart of hearts that Harriet Tubman and those who were with her really knew that freedom was on the other side of the journey. But I think an important part of that journey was for her to understand what it meant to have to navigate through the challenges of, if you will, the midnight hour. And so I'd say maybe for us, the strength of our faith is, yes, knowing that the promise, as it is here in Isaiah, of light and radiance and joy is yet waiting for us, is coming to us. God seeks to surround us with that. But God also reminds us that as we navigate through the dark, through the challenges, through the obscurities, we do not do it alone. Now that example, we read about Harriet Tubman and we can relate to it in a historical sense. But let me just share another example of what it means to grope through the uncertainty, if you will, of, quote, the dark, unquote. Exactly 30 years ago, on this coming Tuesday, my wife and I were in the delivery room at Medical City in Dallas, Texas. And we had taken all the requisite prenatal courses, prepared ourselves, I thought, hopefully fully and adequately. I even, as most oftentimes nervous, expectant parents do, I drove the route a couple of times back and forth to the hospital. Now, on the night of the delivery, I somehow decided to take a different route. Don't ask me why. But we got to the hospital, and we got to the delivery room. And this is important to note that our obstetrician, our OBGYN, was a member of our church, New Hope Baptist Church. He was on our deacon board. To this day, a beloved and dear friend, Dr. Joseph Carlos. So, because I had taken all the requisite prenatal courses and kind of, had some expertise now, I was watching or so I thought, I was watching the machinery And as my wife was hooked up, et cetera, and I'm watching all of the grams as they, or I should say the graphs as they come forward. And I noticed at a given point in time that the waves, if you will, from the graph didn't seem to be consistent like we had learned in the prenatal classes. And at first I thought maybe it was just a little bit of a glitch or whatever, and then I watched for a little bit longer. And they didn't correct themselves. So I politely said to the attending nurse who was nearby, I said, I'm not sure that something is right with the readout. Now, understandably, she probably thought, well, this is some over-prepared and over-enthusiastic, expectant father, something probably no doubt that she'd had experience with before. So at first, she sort of kind of had a slightly benevolently but still dismissive response to me. Then she glanced over herself, and she looked at the readouts. And immediately she said, let me call the doctor. And then when Dr. Carlos came in, he said to us that it wasn't clear as to whether or not there had been some distress in utero, and they were going to need to move quite quickly to perform a cesarean. And the concern that he shared with us at that point was that it wasn't clear as to whether or not there had been significant oxygen deprivation over a period of time. And I didn't have to be a medical specialist to know the possible ramifications of that. And so Dr. Joseph Carlos took my hand and my wife's hand and gathered with us in prayer. And two things took place in that moment, in the darkness of that moment. One was that all of the resources of medical technology were going to be served at that moment to that circumstance and that situation. Thank God for that. But also, for me and my wife, we knew we had to reach deeper than we had ever reached before. To think about the fact that we did not know. We were in a dark moment, if you will. We did not know what would be on the other side of this moment in time, what challenges might present themselves. But I will testify to you this morning that something took a hold of us that I cannot explain, that I cannot take credit for. Something let us know that no matter what, you won't move through this alone. No matter what, the strength that you need, even though you might not be able to gather it up yourselves, will come forth. That radiant light that's talked about here will come forth, even on the other side of a midnight moment. So, we waited. And thanks be to God, the doctors and nurses and technicians did their work. And 30 years ago on this coming Tuesday, Lauren Allison Harkins came into the world, a healthy 7.5-pound baby. Stayed in the NICU for a week because they wanted to make sure everything was okay. But let me give you a report that after that moment of challenge, God was true to God's word and poured out the radiance of light and blessings. She grew up into the wonderful young woman that she is and ended up going to her father's alma mater, Boston University, and having a degree now in dramatic arts, and lives in Los Angeles, California, and is a stand-up comedian. So I'm just here to tell you that God navigates through the darkness with us, but hold on to the promise of the light that will come. So let me just say this as we move forth. I want us to understand that as this year unfolds, don't let anybody disabuse you of the reality that there will be challenges. And they have a way of being painted as quite ominous, and maybe that's not a fully inaccurate rendering. But I will say to you that even as those ominous situations arise, brace yourself for that journey and then trust God to move you through the challenges of night to indeed get to morning. And I say that not just because I can point to a personal example. I say that because I know that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, those who can say the same thing. They've moved through challenges and difficulties, and God has been faithful yet still. So understand that. Hold on to those legacies. Maybe some of those are personal for you. Maybe some of those are people that you've known directly and intimately and lovingly. Maybe some of those are the ones that we've tried to raise even this morning, but hold on to those legacies of faith and let them give you encouragement. And then as they give you encouragement, here's your next responsibility. Let your light shine. As God seeks to move in your life and give you the promise and the fulfillment of hope, let others know that you've got that testimony. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't let anybody mistake you for somebody who doesn't stand firmly in the promises and the presence of God in the challenging and difficult moments of life. And then finally, here's what I think this passage tells us to do. Yes, to navigate through the dark, if you will, to get to the radiance and the joy of the morning, if you will. But I also think that this passage, because Isaiah spends significant time talking about what the bounty of these blessings are going to look like, so much so that he starts to talk about camels and all the things that represent abundance in that moment. So maybe that's telling me that as this year unfolds and as my life continues to unfold, not only should I have hope as we enter into this challenging and difficult year, but maybe I ought to have an audacious hope. Maybe I need to have a hope that defies the pundits, that defies the pollsters, that defies all of those who would tell me to think that the world is going to fall in upon us on our shoulders. Now, that doesn't mean I walk through this world with naivete. No, it means that if I'm braced for the challenge and the struggle, I'm braced because I'm braced with hope. I don't struggle. I don't have radical love because I think I'm going to be defeated. I possess that radical love because I've been given that radical love by the one whose love truly is transformational. So this morning, all I ask of you is this. Stand on the promise that the light is coming, no matter how distant it might seem or feel. And while you make your way through the challenges that indeed surround us, know that you do not do it alone, that you end up having a testimony because of your journey, and that others will see the light that emanates from you. So yes, the year is new. Yes, the promises are indeed unfolding, as along with them the challenges. But the constant that I rest upon is that the God of all creation knows my journey, knows how to speak to me when I rejoice on the mountaintop, knows how to speak to me when I'm raising the festal banners, knows how to speak to me when I feel triumphant because of his joyful presence. But the God of all creation also knows how to speak when I'm in the valley. The God of all creation knows how to speak when I'm in a delivery room feeling lonely. The God of all creation knows how to speak when we make our way through the challenges that will indeed surround us. And as he speaks, he reminds us that the light will come. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your son shall come from far away, and your daughter shall be carried in their nurse's arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The glory of the Lord shall surround you. May God bless you richly, fully, and continually in this new year and all the days yet to come. Amen.